December 26, 1996, dawned like any other winter morning in Boulder, Colorado. The snow-covered streets were quiet, save for the sound of snowplows rumbling in the distance. But in the heart of this peaceful city, a sense of unease settled over one family's home. Patsy Ramsey's voice trembled as she spoke into the phone, her words laced with desperation. "We have a kidnapping, my daughter's missing." The 911 call, made at 5:52 a.m., marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt the Ramseys and the city of Boulder for years to come. In the Ramsey residence, located at 755 15th Street, a scene of chaos unfolded. John Ramsey, Patsy's husband, stood frozen, his mind reeling from the discovery of a ransom note on the back stairs. The note, 2.5 pages long, demanded $118,000 in exchange for the safe return of their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. The amount was peculiar, matching the bonus John had received from his employer. As the police arrived, the Ramseys' world began to crumble. The sound of sirens pierced the morning air, and the once quiet neighborhood was now abuzz with activity. Officers combed the house, searching for any sign of JonBenét or a potential intruder. But as the minutes ticked by, hope began to dwindle. John Ramsey, with a sense of dread, made his way to the basement, calling out his daughter's name. The silence was deafening. And then, he saw her. JonBenét's small body lay on the floor, a garrote tied around her neck. The sound of John's anguished cry still echoes in the minds of those who responded to the scene. The investigation that followed was marked by controversy and criticism. The crime scene was mishandled, with John Ramsey moving JonBenét's body, potentially contaminating evidence. The ransom note, written on a pad from the Ramseys' kitchen, seemed almost too convenient. Theories swirled. Was this a genuine kidnapping, or a staged event to cover up a more sinister crime? As the sun set on Boulder that day, the city was left with more questions than answers. Who could have committed such a heinous crime? And what had really happened to JonBenét Ramsey in the hours leading up to her death? The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind through the snow-covered trees, a haunting reminder of the peace that had been shattered. JonBenét, a bright and vibrant 6-year-old, had been a child beauty pageant participant, known for her charming smile and sparkling eyes. Her life had been one of laughter and joy, filled with the promise of a bright future. But in an instant, all of that was taken away. The Ramseys, once a happy family, were now left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. Patsy, a devoted mother, was consumed by grief, her world torn apart by the loss of her daughter. John, a successful businessman, was now a man on a mission, driven by a desire for justice and truth. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the city of Boulder was left to wonder what had really happened to JonBenét Ramsey. And as the investigation continued, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The search for JonBenét's killer had just begun, and it would be a journey that would take years to unfold. The snow-covered streets of Boulder, Colorado, were quiet on the evening of December 25, 1996. The city was bathed in a serene silence, the only sound being the soft crunch of snow underfoot. The Ramsey family, residents of 755 15th Street, had just returned from a Christmas party, the festivities still echoing in their minds. JonBenét, a bright and vibrant 6-year-old, was tucked into bed, her eyes sparkling with excitement from the day's events. As the night wore on, the Ramsey household grew quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the old house. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, had settled into her routine, preparing for the next day's festivities. She had spent the evening chatting with friends and family, her voice filled with laughter and warmth. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, had retreated to his study, the soft glow of the computer screen illuminating his face as he worked on a project. JonBenét's daily routine was a familiar one, filled with the joys of childhood. She was a child beauty pageant participant, known for her charming smile and sparkling eyes. Her days were filled with practice sessions, perfecting her dance moves and song routines. She loved being the center of attention, and her parents encouraged her passion, cheering her on at every competition. The Ramsey family's home, a beautiful two-story house, was a warm and welcoming place. The walls were adorned with family photos, and the furniture was comfortable and inviting. The kitchen, where Patsy spent most of her time, was filled with the delicious smells of freshly baked cookies and roasting meats. The backyard, where JonBenét loved to play, was a haven of greenery, with trees and flowers that bloomed in every color of the rainbow. As the night of December 25, 1996, drew to a close, the Ramsey family retired to their bedrooms, exhausted but content. The house grew quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. The snow outside continued to fall, casting a serene silence over the city. And in the stillness of the night, a sense of peace settled over the Ramsey household, a peace that would be shattered forever in just a few short hours. The clock on the wall ticked away, marking the passing of time. The Ramseys slept, unaware of the horror that was to come. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, a sense of unease began to settle over the house, a sense that something was not quite right. Patsy Ramsey stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she reached for her glasses. She sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and swung her legs over the side of the bed. And as she stood up, she felt a sense of trepidation, a sense that something was terribly wrong. She walked to JonBenét's bedroom, her heart beating with a growing sense of dread. And as she opened the door, she was met with a sight that would haunt her forever. JonBenét was gone. The night of December 25, 1996, was a tranquil one in Boulder, Colorado. The snow fell gently, casting a serene silence over the city. The Ramsey family, exhausted but content, retired to their bedrooms. The only sound was the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Patsy Ramsey stirred. She sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her feet touched the cold floor. She reached for her glasses on the nightstand. The room was dark, except for a sliver of light peeking through the curtains. She walked to JonBenét's bedroom. The door creaked as she opened it. The room was empty. JonBenét's bed was unmade, but there was no sign of her. Patsy's heart beat faster. She called out, "JonBenét?" There was no response. Patsy's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of her daughter. She checked the closet, the bathroom, and under the bed. JonBenét was nowhere to be found. Patsy's mind racing, she rushed back to her bedroom. She woke John, her husband, and told him JonBenét was missing. John jumped out of bed. Together, they searched the house, calling out JonBenét's name. The house was quiet, except for the sound of their voices. They checked every room, but there was no sign of JonBenét. Patsy's anxiety grew. She felt a sense of dread wash over her. She rushed downstairs to the kitchen. That's when she saw it, a ransom note on the stairs. The note was handwritten, demanding $118,000 in exchange for JonBenét's safe return. Patsy's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. She dialed 911. The operator answered, "Boulder Police Department." Patsy's voice shook, "My daughter's missing." The operator asked for her address. Patsy replied, 755 15th Street. The operator assured her that help was on the way. Patsy waited, her eyes fixed on the ransom note. The words blurred together as tears filled her eyes. The sound of sirens pierced the air. The police had arrived. Patsy's heart was racing. She opened the door, and the officers rushed in. They began searching the house, looking for any sign of JonBenét. The search continued, but there was no sign of JonBenét. The police found a basement window open, but there was no sign of forced entry. The house was in disarray, but it was unclear if it was from a struggle or from the family's earlier celebration. As the police searched, Patsy's anxiety turned to despair. She felt like she was in a nightmare. The ransom note, the empty bedrooms, the open window, it all seemed like a terrible dream. But it was real. JonBenét was gone. And then, John Ramsey made a discovery that would change everything. He found a small, lifeless body in the basement. As the police officers descended upon the Ramsey household, the air was thick with anticipation and fear. Patsy's trembling hands still clutched the phone, her eyes fixed on the ransom note as if willing it to reveal its secrets. The sound of sirens had given way to the murmur of hushed voices and the creaking of footsteps as the officers began their search. Detective Linda Arndt, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, took charge of the scene. She began by questioning Patsy and John, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. Patsy's voice was barely above a whisper as she recounted the family's evening, from the Christmas party to the discovery of the ransom note. John's eyes darted back and forth, his expression a mix of concern and confusion. As the detectives combed the house, they noticed a few peculiar things. A basement window was open, but there was no sign of forced entry or struggle. The house was in disarray, but it was unclear if it was from a frantic search for JonBenét or from the family's earlier celebration. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, something didn't add up. Meanwhile, Detective Arndt continued her questioning, trying to get a sense of the family's dynamics and potential enemies. Patsy mentioned a few acquaintances who had been acting strange lately, but nothing that seemed particularly noteworthy. John, on the other hand, seemed hesitant to discuss his business dealings, citing nothing out of the ordinary as the reason for his evasiveness. As the search continued, the officers began to uncover some overlooked clues. A piece of tape on the basement floor caught one detective's eye, while another found a faint scratch on the windowsill. These small discoveries sparked a flurry of activity as the team carefully collected and documented each finding. Just as it seemed like the investigation was gaining momentum, a strange witness testimony threw a wrench into the works. A neighbor reported seeing a person lurking around the Ramsey house earlier that morning, but the description was vague and the timing unclear. The detectives exchanged frustrated glances. They needed concrete evidence, not vague sightings. As the morning wore on, the tension inside the house grew thicker. Patsy's anxiety had given way to despair, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. John's expression had turned stoic, his jaw clenched in determination. The detectives, too, were feeling the weight of the case, their expressions grim and focused. And then, just as the search seemed to be yielding nothing, John Ramsey made a discovery that would change everything. He called out to the detectives, his voice low and urgent. "I've found something," he said, his eyes fixed on something in the basement. The detectives rushed to his side, their hearts racing with anticipation. What had John found? Was it a clue, a piece of evidence, or something far more sinister? The air was thick with suspense as they peered into the basement, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. And that's when they saw it, a small, lifeless body, tucked away in a corner of the basement. JonBenét Ramsey, the 6-year-old beauty pageant contestant, lay still and unresponsive, her eyes frozen in a permanent stare. The room fell silent, the only sound the soft hum of the police radios and the quiet sobs of Patsy Ramsey. The investigation had just taken a devastating turn. The body was found in the basement, and John Ramsey's world had just come crashing down. As the detectives began to process the crime scene, the air was thick with the smell of decay and death. The basement, once a cozy family room, had become a grim reminder of the brutality that had taken place. John Ramsey's eyes were fixed on the lifeless body of his daughter, his mind reeling with the thought of who could have committed such a heinous crime. The sound of rustling papers and murmured conversations filled the room as the investigators started to collect evidence. A faint hum of police radios and the soft beeping of equipment created a somber background noise, a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation. Patsy Ramsey's sobs had subsided, replaced by an eerie silence, as if she was frozen in time, unable to comprehend the reality of the situation. Detective Linda Arndt, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail, began to survey the area. She noticed a piece of paper on the floor, partially hidden under the basement stairs. As she picked it up, she realized it was a ransom note, demanding $118,000 in exchange for JonBenét's safe return. The note was written on a pad from the Ramseys' kitchen, with a pen that was found on the counter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words sent a chill down Arndt's spine. As the investigation deepened, the detectives started to look into the Ramsey family's background. They discovered that John Ramsey had a successful business career, but had also faced financial difficulties in the past. Patsy Ramsey, on the other hand, had a history of health problems and had undergone treatment for ovarian cancer. The couple had 2 children, JonBenét and Burke, who was 9 years old at the time of the murder. The detectives also found a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table, with a spoon lying next to it. The autopsy had revealed that JonBenét had eaten pineapple hours before her death, but both her parents claimed to be unaware of it. This small discrepancy raised more questions than answers. Who had given JonBenét the pineapple, and why had they not mentioned it to the police? As the day wore on, the detectives continued to gather evidence and piece together the events of the previous night. They discovered a broken window in the basement, which seemed to suggest that an intruder had entered the house. However, there were no signs of forced entry, and the window was found to be locked from the inside. The more they investigated, the more questions they had. The room was filled with an eerie silence, as if the very presence of death had sucked the air out of it. The detectives were consumed by the case, their minds racing with theories and suspects. And then, just as they thought they were making progress, a new lead emerged, one that would take the investigation down a dark and twisted path. A suspect had come forward, a man named John Mark Carr, who claimed to have killed JonBenét. His confession was chilling, but the detectives were wary. They had seen many false confessions before, and they knew that Carr's story had to be thoroughly investigated. As they delved deeper into Carr's past, they discovered a history of obsession and fixation. But was he capable of murder? The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would lead the detectives down a rabbit hole of twists and turns. And as they dug deeper, they would uncover secrets and lies that would shake the very foundations of the case. The darkness was just beginning to unfold. The investigation into JonBenét Ramsey's murder had been ongoing for months, with the Boulder Police Department following every lead, no matter how small. The detectives had been working tirelessly, poring over evidence, conducting interviews, and analyzing every detail. But despite their best efforts, they still had no killer, no motive, and no clear direction. The case was a puzzle, with pieces that didn't seem to fit together. As they delved deeper into the case, they began to focus on a new suspect, a man named John Mark Carr. Carr had been a teacher in Thailand, but he had a dark past, with a history of obsession and fixation on young girls. He had been questioned by the police before, but he had always managed to talk his way out of trouble. This time, however, he had come forward, claiming to have killed JonBenét. The detectives were wary, having seen many false confessions before. But there was something about Carr's story that seemed different. He knew details about the crime scene that only the killer would know. He described the location of the body, the type of rope used to bind JonBenét's wrists, and the way she was dressed. The detectives were intrigued, and they decided to bring Carr in for further questioning. As Carr sat in the interrogation room, he seemed calm and collected. He answered the detectives' questions with ease, providing them with a detailed account of the events leading up to JonBenét's murder. He claimed to have entered the house through an open window, to have found JonBenét asleep in her bedroom, and to have killed her in a fit of rage. The detectives listened intently, taking note of every detail. But as they dug deeper into Carr's past, they began to uncover discrepancies in his story. He had a history of making false confessions, and he had been known to fabricate stories to get attention. The detectives started to suspect that Carr was just another attention seeker, trying to insert himself into the high-profile case. Despite their doubts, the detectives decided to continue investigating Carr. They collected DNA samples from him and compared them to the evidence found at the crime scene. But as they waited for the results, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being led down a rabbit hole. Carr's story seemed too good to be true, and they suspected that he might be hiding something. The days turned into weeks, and the detectives were still waiting for the DNA results. They were on edge, knowing that the outcome could make or break the case. Finally, the results came in, and they were shocking. Carr's DNA did not match the evidence found at the crime scene. The detectives were disappointed, but not surprised. They had suspected that Carr was a false lead all along. As they closed the book on Carr, the detectives couldn't help but feel frustrated. They had wasted valuable time and resources on a suspect who had turned out to be a dead end. But they knew that they couldn't give up. They had to keep pushing forward, following every lead, no matter how small. The case was still unsolved, and they were determined to find justice for JonBenét. The investigation would continue, with the detectives following a new trail of clues, a new lead that would take them down a dark and twisted path. And as they walked out of the police station, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, that the killer was still out there, waiting for them to make their next move. The darkness was closing in, and the detectives were running out of time. And then, just as they thought they were back to square one, a mysterious letter arrived at the police station. The darkness that descended upon Boulder, Colorado, on December 26, 1996, would forever be etched in the memories of its residents. It was a chill that seeped into the bones, a feeling of dread that lingered long after the initial shock had worn off. For in the heart of this picturesque city, a heinous crime had been committed, one that would shake the very foundations of the community. 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey, a child of beauty and charm, had been brutally murdered, her lifeless body found in the basement of her family's home. As the investigation unfolded, a tangled web of clues and suspects began to emerge. The ransom note, penned on a pad from the Ramseys' kitchen, demanded $118,000, a sum that eerily matched John Ramsey's bonus from his employer. The handwriting, though, was not a clear match to either John or Patsy Ramsey, leaving detectives to ponder the identity of the author. The crime scene, too, was a puzzle, with signs of forced entry nowhere to be found, yet a basement window open, as if inviting the killer to enter. The initial focus of the investigation centered around the Ramsey family themselves. John, Patsy, and their son Burke were all questioned, their alibis scrutinized, and their potential motives examined. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the police began to broaden their scope, casting a wider net to catch the perpetrator. The discovery of unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's clothing would later prove to be a crucial turning point, one that would ultimately lead to the exoneration of the Ramsey family. In the years that followed, a slew of suspects emerged, each with their own unique story to tell. There was John Mark Carr, the elementary school teacher who falsely confessed to the crime, only to be cleared when his DNA failed to match the evidence. And then there was Gary Oliva, a known pedophile who was investigated, but ultimately cleared, when his DNA did not match the sample found on JonBenét's clothing. The list of suspects was long, but the lack of concrete evidence made it a daunting task to pinpoint the killer. As the detectives delved deeper into the case, they began to piece together a psychological profile of the perpetrator. The crime scene, with its staged ransom note and carefully placed body, suggested a calculating individual, one who had planned the attack with precision. The use of a garrote, a ligature made from twine and a wooden handle, implied a level of sophistication, a killer who had thought through every detail. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, there were signs of haste, of a killer who had been interrupted, or perhaps, one who had simply lost control. The sequence of events on that fateful night was still shrouded in mystery, but the detectives had managed to reconstruct a timeline. The Ramseys had attended a Christmas party, returning home around 10 p.m. JonBenét had been put to bed, and the rest of the family had retired for the night. The killer, it seemed, had struck sometime between 10 p.m. and 5:52 a.m., when Patsy Ramsey made the frantic 911 call. The window of opportunity was small, but the killer had managed to exploit it, leaving behind a trail of clues that would haunt the detectives for years to come. As the investigation continued, the detectives couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, that the killer was still out there, waiting for them to make their next move. The darkness was closing in, and the detectives were running out of time. And then, just as they thought they were back to square one, a mysterious letter arrived at the police station, its contents sending a chill down their spines. The truth is closer than you think. The darkness of that winter morning still lingered, a chill that seeped into the bones of the detectives as they delved deeper into the case. It was December 26, 1996, and the city of Boulder, Colorado, was about to be shaken to its core. The 911 call from Patsy Ramsey had set off a chain of events, a frantic search for a missing 6-year-old girl that would end in tragedy. As the sun rose over the Rocky Mountains, a sense of unease settled over the small community, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. The Ramseys' home, a grand house on 15th Street, was now a crime scene, its walls and floors holding secrets that would take years to unravel. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, had made the gruesome discovery, his daughter's lifeless body lying in the basement, a garrote around her neck. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of activity, police officers and forensic experts scouring the house for clues, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The ransom note, a 2.5-page handwritten demand for $118,000, was found on the back stairs, its words a chilling message from the killer. As the detectives began to reconstruct the events of that fateful night, they realized that the killer had been meticulous, leaving behind a trail of subtle clues. The pineapple on the kitchen table, the bowl and spoon in the sink, all hinted at a hurried departure, a killer who had been interrupted or had simply lost control. The detectives' eyes scanned the crime scene, taking in every detail, from the faint scratches on the windowsill to the torn piece of fabric caught in the door. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle that would take years to complete. The investigation was a complex web of leads and suspects, each one carefully examined and discarded. The Ramseys themselves were initially under suspicion, their behavior and alibis scrutinized by the detectives. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the focus began to shift. The mysterious letter that arrived at the police station, its contents a chilling message from the killer, sent a shiver down the spines of the detectives. The truth is closer than you think, it read, a haunting reminder that the killer was still out there, watching and waiting. The detectives' frustration grew as the case remained unsolved, the lack of progress a constant reminder of their failure. But they refused to give up, driven by a determination to uncover the truth, to bring justice to JonBenét and her family. The case was a labyrinth, full of twists and turns, each one leading to a new dead end. Yet, the detectives persevered, their minds racing with theories and suspects, their eyes scanning the evidence for that one crucial clue. And then, just as they thought they were back to square one, a breakthrough came, a discovery that would change the course of the investigation forever. The DNA evidence, a tiny fragment of skin found on JonBenét's clothing, was a game-changer, a clue that would eventually lead to the exoneration of the Ramsey family. But for now, it was just a thread, a thin strand of hope in a case that seemed to be slipping away. As the sun set over Boulder, casting a golden glow over the city, the detectives couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched, that the killer was still out there, waiting for them to make their next move. The darkness was closing in, and the detectives were running out of time. And then, just as they thought they were closing in on the truth, a new lead emerged, a tantalizing hint of a suspect that would take them down a new and treacherous path. The case was a roller coaster, full of twists and turns, each one leading to a new and unexpected destination. And as the detectives held their breath, waiting for the next revelation, the killer remained silent, watching and waiting, their secret still safe, for now. The phone on the detective's desk rang, shrill in the silence, its ring a harbinger of the next twist in the case, a call that would change everything. December 26, 1996, would forever be etched in the minds of the Boulder Police Department. It was the day 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey's lifeless body was discovered in the basement of her family's home. The initial 911 call from Patsy Ramsey had set off a chain of events that would change the course of the investigation forever. As detectives began to process the crime scene, they found a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note demanding $118,000, a peculiar amount that matched John Ramsey's bonus from his employer. The crime scene was a complex web of clues, with each thread leading to more questions than answers. The basement where JonBenét's body was found was a stark, cold space, the only sound the soft hum of the furnace. The detectives moved methodically, their footsteps echoing off the walls as they searched for any sign of evidence. A white blanket, partially covering JonBenét's body, seemed out of place in the otherwise pristine room. The air was thick with the smell of decay, a morbid reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives became increasingly aware of the scrutiny they were under. The media was relentless, with reporters camped outside the Ramsey residence, waiting for any morsel of information. The detectives worked tirelessly, poring over every detail, every shred of evidence. They interviewed the Ramsey family, their friends, and acquaintances, searching for any inconsistency in their stories. The Ramseys' older son, Burke, was just 9 years old at the time of the murder, and his potential involvement was a topic of discussion among investigators. The case was a labyrinth of twists and turns, with each new lead sending the detectives down a different path. In 1998, a grand jury was convened to hear evidence in the case, setting the stage for potential indictments against those suspected of involvement in JonBenét's murder. The following year, the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime, but District Attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence. Years went by, and the case remained unsolved. In 2003, a breakthrough came when trace DNA recovered from JonBenét's clothing was found to belong to an unidentified male. This significant development would later be used to exonerate the Ramsey family. However, the DNA evidence also raised more questions, as it hinted at the presence of an unknown individual at the crime scene. The detectives worked to identify the source of the DNA, but it remained a mystery, a frustrating reminder of the case's complexity. In 2006, a shocking confession came from John Markar, an elementary school teacher who claimed to have killed JonBenét. However, his confession was later found to be false, and his DNA did not match the evidence from the crime scene. The detectives were back to square one, their hopes of solving the case dashed once again. The Carr confession was a stark reminder of the case's ability to deceive and mislead, a labyrinth of false leads and dead ends. As the years passed, the case continued to haunt the detectives. In 2008, District Attorney Mary Lacey publicly exonerated the Ramsey family based on the unidentified male DNA profile found on JonBenét's clothing. The exoneration marked a significant shift in the investigation's focus, as the detectives began to pursue new leads and suspects. However, the case remained a puzzle, with many pieces still missing. The investigation had become a marathon, with the detectives facing countless setbacks and disappointments. Yet, they refused to give up, driven by a determination to uncover the truth. In 2013, the grand jury's decision to indict the Ramseys in 1999 was publicly revealed, providing new insight into the investigation's history. The revelation sparked renewed interest in the case, as the public clamored for answers. The detectives continued to work tirelessly, following every lead, no matter how small. In 2016, the Boulder Police Department stated that the investigation into JonBenét's death remained an active homicide case, with DNA evidence and other leads continuing to be pursued. The case had become a cold case, but the detectives remained committed to solving it, driven by a sense of justice and a need to uncover the truth. As the years went by, the case remained a source of fascination and horror, a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the shadows. The detectives continued to work on the case, driven by a sense of duty and a need to bring closure to the Ramsey family. And then, just as it seemed like the case was about to go cold, a new lead emerged, a tantalizing hint of a suspect that would take the detectives down a new and treacherous path. The phone on the detective's desk rang, shrill in the silence. "We've got a match on the DNA," the voice on the other end said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. The JonBenét Ramsey case, a haunting and intricate true crime investigation, has left an indelible mark on the nation's collective psyche. The quest for justice, though elusive, has driven detectives to pursue every lead, no matter how small, in the hopes of unraveling the mystery of JonBenét's tragic death. As the years have passed, the case has undergone numerous twists and turns, each new revelation shedding light on the dark and complex nature of the crime. In the aftermath of the grand jury's decision to indict John and Patsy Ramsey, the family was subjected to intense scrutiny, their every move watched and analyzed by the public and the media. The Ramseys, however, maintained their innocence, steadfast in their claim that they were not involved in JonBenét's murder. The grand jury's decision, though, was not without controversy, as many questioned the validity of the evidence presented and the motivations of those involved. The introduction of DNA evidence in 2003 marked a significant turning point in the case. The discovery of an unidentified male DNA profile on JonBenét's clothing raised more questions than answers, as detectives struggled to identify the source of the DNA. The revelation sparked renewed interest in the case, as the public clamored for answers. The detectives, fueled by a sense of justice and determination, worked tirelessly to track down every lead, no matter how small. In 2006, a shocking development shook the case. John Markar, an elementary school teacher, falsely confessed to the murder. His confession, though later discredited, sent shockwaves through the nation, as the public struggled to comprehend the motivations behind such a heinous crime. The car episode served as a stark reminder of the complexities and challenges inherent in the investigation, where truth and deception often blurred. As the years went by, the case remained a source of fascination and horror, a grim reminder of the darkness that lurked in the shadows. The detectives, driven by a sense of duty and a need to bring closure to the Ramsey family, continued to work on the case, following every lead, no matter how small. The phone on the detective's desk rang, shrill in the silence. "We've got a match on the DNA," the voice on the other end said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. The detective's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with possibilities, as he scribbled down notes on a pad of paper. The court verdict, though not yet rendered, loomed large in the minds of all involved. The lasting societal impact of the case was undeniable, as the nation grappled with the darker aspects of human nature. The JonBenét Ramsey case had become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of the horrors that could occur in the most seemingly idyllic of communities. And yet, despite the many twists and turns, the case remained a source of fascination, a reminder of the complexities and challenges inherent in the pursuit of justice. As the detective delved deeper into the case, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that a crucial piece of evidence was still lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. The DNA match was just the beginning, a thread that, when pulled, would unravel a tangled web of secrets and lies. The detective's eyes locked onto the DNA report, his mind racing with possibilities, as the words match found seemed to leap off the page. And in that moment, he knew that the case was far from over, that the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The phone on his desk rang again, shrill in the silence, as a voice whispered a single, chilling word: "Run."